Hi, I'm Garnbreak1, and this is Midgardia RPG's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Matt Corley. How's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
I'm pretty well. It's a lovely day out here in Alberta. So, you here to talk about the Devil City. Would you tell me a little bit
Yes.
about that?
Yeah. So the Devil City is the Kickstarter that I have going right now. It's a set of books. It's a novella that's a horror fiction, and then it's also a fifth edition compatible RPG setting book that goes with Whispers in the Dark, which is a quick start set of rules. I wrote with MT Black back actually at the end of last year, published in January through Drive Through RPG. And Whispers in the Dark uses the D&D rules that we keep doing our tag is rules and gameplay you'll never forget. Um, because it's rules that there are tens of millions of people, probably more than that know how to play D&D. And so what we wanted to do was have a game that kind of, for lack of a better term, it emulates some of the other systems out there that are great. I'm an unapologetic fan of Call of Cthulhu. Delta Green by Dennis is amazing. Trail of Cthulhu. I just bought a bunch of their books again. I have the PDFs. I'm like, I might as well get the paper. Just grabbed a bunch of those today, actually. Um, and so, there was a situation that came up in my group a couple of years ago, actually, because I've been working on these books in one way or another for about 2.5 years, where my friends wanted to play something a little different than just straight heroic fantasy. We were playing a pretty dark campaign, but it was still D&D. Um, but they wanted to do something in kind of basically our world, and so we kind of went through some Call of Cthulhu games. They had a great time on it, but there really was a barrier for them being able to play it because they know D&D, but they didn't know Call of Cthulhu and D100 games. And again, D100 games are actually very simple and straightforward to learn, but everybody's busy. My friends, all of us that play together, I'll be 44 in 6 weeks. We're all professionals. We all have kids. We all have jobs. So even getting that 2, 3, 4 hours every other week to play is hard. So grabbing another book is not always easy. And, there's certainly people too where grabbing another book just isn't an option for other reasons as well. So again, we just kind of started looking at it, and MT kind of reached out to me because he'd known I'd done some other stuff in that space. And it kind of grew from there.
Cool.
And yeah, so again, yeah, Devil City is the novella. I wrote it with Sarah Tantlinger. Sarah is a Bram Stoker award-winning author. That's kind of the big horror author thing, kind of like a Nebula or a Hugo. Um, and she won it last year actually for a book, a collection of poetry based on H.H. Holmes of all things. So she's definitely an expert. Um, and the other book in it is Horror in the Windy City, which is the source book that covers Chicago from 1850 to 1899, and that's the D&D part, or the 5e game part of it.
Cool. So, what kind of changes are made for Whispers in the Dark to make it a more horrific setting as opposed to the heroic fantasy of good old 5e?
Right. So a couple of things. So the horror, we have a couple aspects that we changed. Probably three main ones that we changed. One is MT and I, we actually eliminated classes. And in character creation now, what you do is actually it's all your background. Everybody starts. There are actually a few kind of ancestries, is the term we use. So you can get a slight differences there. But again, you pick a background, which is basically an occupation. And at that point, we have a 10 level system. D&D goes to 20, we go to 10. We may go higher, who knows. Um, but as you go up in progression, you really start to delineate your character to a point is going to be through your feats, which again, we're going to rely more on feats. And again, a couple things like that actually reduces the complexity of D&D again quite a bit. And D&D is not a complex game really, but classes are one of the main things that give it a little bit of crunch. Another change that we did that again affects the players is, by and large, magic is mostly eliminated. MT just presented a new book. He actually put it on drive through, I think, last week, called The Players or The Investigator's Companion. And in it, he does add more magic, but the magic and whispers, there's going to be two versions, and there's going to be kind of two schools, for lack of a better term. Is there's lots that's going to be more kind of like ritualistic based, or where it takes minutes or hours to do. So it's not like you're going to go into a spell or you're going to go into an encounter and you're going to cast Fireball. That just doesn't happen because, again, this is more realistic. Um, Another system of magic, which will be explored later by me, is going to be Vril magic, VRIL magic. And Vril magic is actually going to be, again, it's going to be very primal, and it's going to be based on expending your hit dice. So that's a pretty big difference. But I think that's a really fun. I'm actually super excited to do that. I've done something similar to it for Sandy Peterson in a game that we haven't published yet. But I really love the idea of expending your hit dice in a game. I think it's such a neat thing, and it's such a cool mechanic that isn't hardly used much. Not in D&D anyway. So those are probably the two biggest ones that you'll notice immediately. And the other one, the one that's the horror part, is I wrote sanity rules for my first self-published book, which was Lamplight Sanitarium, which was Victorian Gothic, fully 5e compatible book. But a large part of that book was sanity and madness rules that I wrote. And what those rules do is they are going to give you a combination of crunch and role playing cues for your players and your characters to do in the course of adventure. And the concept is just like most of the other horror games, is that as your character goes through these experiences, and horrific experience or just stressful experiences, they do change mentally over time. And what I wanted to do, again, this is the horror aspect, is introduce some sort of mechanic or consequence, for lack of a better word, so that, 8 hours later, you're not all better. That's probably the best example we all talk about. A lot of folks talk about is, you can go, get an ancient black dragon and you get hit for 160 acid damage, and in our heads, that should basically take off like half your body. But in D&D, if you sleep for 8 hours, you're 100% ready to go. Nothing happened to you. And the sanity rules kind of they have a little bit more, they linger and they stay on more because they do sanity damage, or decrease your sanity, really is what it is. And so that's kind of the horrific part. A small thing, which I guess is probably not too small, at least it's not small for the players, is that short rests are now a day, long rests are a week, basically. And again, we're not the first to do that. I actually saw that in a Mike Myler product that he did years ago.
Wasteland
Again,
2099. Yeah.
Which one? Yeah. So it's not the changes we made are actually streamlining more than anything. And the sanity rules kind of sound clunky, but they're really not. I have a cheat sheet in the book, and it's mostly just tables, and there's lots of examples. And so far, I've gotten great feedback on all of it.
Cool. Well, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is this kind of inspired by the old Ravenloft Gothic Earth stuff from way back in the day?
So Lamplight Sanitarium can actually would so Donathan Fry and I wrote. Hey, Donathan was the only person to help me write that. I wrote that and did almost all of it by myself. Donathan helped me towards the end because I was getting kind of a couple things came up and I needed to grab some help. And Don is a huge Ravenloft fan, and actually I was too. I mean, I kicked myself. I actually had Ravenloft and I ended up selling it like 10 years ago for like 50 or 60 bucks. But still, if I had it now, I'd kind of be like, I'd rather have it now to go next to my, Barrier Peak. But anyway, the Lamplight Sanitarium, again, this is the one I did 2 years ago, or I guess a year ago, would very, very easily be a domain of dread. Easily. It would actually solve some of the problems or the challenges of keeping players in a sanitarium, because it's a sanitarium. Several, it's 3 floors, 2 wings. So it's a big sanitarium. It's almost like a mega dungeon in some ways, but it's a sanitarium. And, one of the challenges there is how do you keep the players in there? Well, if it's a domain of dread, anytime they go out, the mists just put them back. And again, I know people do it actually at home. But I haven't had the chance to really explore it a whole lot, but it's something really fun that I think is pretty easy to do if you're a Ravenloft fan and you want to keep it D&D. But again, you can still have those sanity rules if you want. And again, it's super gothic-y horror. I think one person actually even made Strahd I have a headmistress or an administrator in my game, or in Lamplight is a woman that's kind of like a warlocky type. But someone who has bought it actually replaced her with Strahd. and had Strahd running in a sanitarium, which was actually really neat because there's a lot of experiments and stuff going on, people. So pretty fun.
Yeah. Classic sanitariums, wonderful places.
I have the sanity rules with the NPCs I made and some of the little items of interest is actually pay what you want on drive through RPG now. So if anybody sees it and wants to just see what it looks like, that will actually give you a really good idea. I mean, and it's pay what you want, but I think it's still about 70 or 80 pages. It's not small. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. But yeah, it's really fun and it's easy to throw into any campaign,
Yeah,
and your players will have no idea what you're doing.
the link to that should be right below this video, unless I forgot, in which case you'll let me in the comments and I'll fix that. So, how did you come around to, like, H.H.? Did you start with, I want to set a thing in Chicago, or did you read up on H.H. Holmes and go, oh man, this is perfect, or how'd that happen?
So I kind of, a couple different ways. Sarah's book came actually. I bought Sarah's book and read it and kind of interacted with her online a little bit. And if anybody's familiar with H.H. Holmes' story, and I try to do a really quick recap, he was the first American serial killer is H.H. Holmes. There are urban legends and theories that he might actually be him and Jack the Ripper might actually be the same person. That's widely disproven, but it is a really neat idea. And one of the things he did is he kind of set up shop in Chicago in the late 1880s and the early 1890s. And he, at one point, he actually owned an entire block in Inglewood, and he had a hotel on it, which was a World's Fair hotel. And when he was captured, he confessed to like 27, 28, 26, 27 murders. Well, the story goes, though, that it was probably or could have been as close to 200. And the way that he got to, again, like that number, which I'm thinking of like the Frighteners right now with the ghosts like killing people and putting numbers on their forehead. But anyway, so the way he got to that though was he would actually encourage folks to stay in his hotel during the World's Exposition in 1893, and especially travelers and women that were from out of town. And then he would do his thing and he would kill them, trap them in there, do all sorts of different things. And so if we took up the word H.H. Holmes and put some fantasy name in there, it's a D&D game already. And this actually happened. This is real stuff that did happen. So, I had this, it really started in this case. It's funny is because Lamps Light started as a sanitarium, so as a building. This actually started as a building too. And so it's kind of weird because at least my last two big books for me have been, I actually start with a building and I build stuff around it. And again, the buildings are pretty interesting. So yeah, the castle, it's fully mapped in the game. It's three levels and then one basement. Really neat the way Toby put the maps out. There's a couple of them that are actually on the Kickstarter that you can see. And it just kind of go that way. The story itself is just so easy to think of as a game. And as we were researching Chicago, so I have a great team of writers, and we actually are writing the book as almost like a historical fiction. It is not. We are researching. We are looking into what really happened, using that, and then kind of making some adjustments and polishing to make it a little bit more horrific or fantasy. But Chicago in the late 1800s didn't need a lot of help. The University of Chicago burned down like 3 times, and nobody really knows exactly why this kept happening. There was the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. There were a lot of things going on then that it really literally was like me adding a sentence to the end of it of a page, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my god, this is the best sort of scenario hook I could think of. So it really kind of grew organically, and it grew really pretty easily actually with the writers and all the research that we did.
I'm glad to hear that. Chicago is weird, man. I've never been there myself. My knowledge of it is, I will admit, mostly limited to, I think, the Dresden Files novels, which I believe take place there.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely. I
Unfortunately,
love Harry Dresden.
it,
I'm a
it.
huge fan of Harry Dresden.
Oh yeah, me too. I need to read more of them sometime. Are the maps accurate to the real Murder Man or
Yeah,
Murder Hotel?
right. So that's a great question. So one of the things, so the novella that Sarah and I wrote, Devil City, there's actually an appendix at the end of it. So the Devil City is again the novella. Um, It's illustrated. It's illustrated by some of the folks in the horror industry that are pretty big names, like Danielle Sarah, Sam Araya, Francois Vaillancourt. Like Francois just finished actually an illustrated version of The Revival by Stephen King. So these aren't, just kind of random people that I found on Twitter. Although some are, but they're all really talented. But anyway, so at the end of the book or the novella, since it does take place there, one of the things I did want to do is I added a little appendix in which I kind of talk about Toby and I in our process and actually finding out information about the murder castle. And then at the end of the novella, there are actually all four maps so that folks can see the maps and see what we put together. The first floor is relatively consistently mapped from like kind of historically, but after that, it gets really kind of wonky because what happened is, this was all in the 1890s and it was the story of the century. I mean, literally the story of the century in the US. And so journalists would, basically write their own maps. They weren't there. They would talk to folks and say, oh my God, he has a room with a, furnace large enough to put in a person or an enormous vat of acid or this or that or the other thing. And so they just kind of went with it. And certain maps kind of got propagated throughout. Other ones didn't. And, there's a few folks, he did actually build a part of a house in Texas. Some of that was incorporated into it. But really what happened was Toby and I looked at everything. I gave him some rough ideas because one, we did need it to fit in a book and be useful for an RPG. I mean, the hotel itself took up an entire block. So we're not going to have 180, 200 rooms. They're all basically the same. Now, it does have about 100 rooms, and they're all undescribed. But anyway, so yeah, all the key features are in there. But we just did a little bit of tweaking. And again, there's probably no such thing as a historically accurate map of it anywhere. But we do definitely hit all the high points. Toby's art, I mean, I think of his maps as art. They're all hand drawn, kind of like a Dyson Dyson map, are fantastic. I mean, they are so, so great. And again, yeah, it's on the Kickstarter page, so you can see what they look like. They're always on my Twitter. I post them up pretty regularly as well. So yeah, it's super, super neat. And again, I think it definitely does a good job of getting the feel for it for anybody that wants to see it.
I can't believe journalists would just make things up to sell more
I know it's
copies.
crazy,
Yeah, it's
isn't
completely
it?
out of character for the media.
It is. It's out of place.
Thankfully, it's not like that anymore.
I know. There was definitely some deja vu moments of reading some of these things that happened, 150 years ago and things that are happening now. So yeah.
Yeah, luckily it's harder to build a murder hotel now. I think.
I hope so.
Don't quote me on that. It's gonna be real awkward if in like a week it turns out that's not the
Yeah.
case. Um, yeah, I feel like I had another question, but then was distracted by making sarcastic comments about the media. It's a common problem for me, unfortunately. Uh,
No worries.
yeah, this seems really
Uh,
cool. I have a soft spot deep in my heart for people making D&D 5th edition do things D&D 5th edition is not meant for. We mentioned Mike Myler earlier. I have a lot of his stuff. Actually interviewed him before. Cool guy.
yeah, Mike, I really like Mike's stuff. Mike was pretty darn prolific there for a few years too.
Still is, now that Vast Cavia is done, I'm sure he'll find another project.
Right.
Uh,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to bring up about the Devil City and Whispers in the Dark and Lamplight Sanitary
Yeah.
and so on?
So the Devil's City, the book itself is again, it's a novella. It's only about 15,000 words, so it's a pretty quick read. And in it, Sarah and I explore the stories of five different people who Holmes identifies, hunts, and captures. And the final chapter of the book is actually Holmes in his basement doing the things to them that he wants to do. Um, and the reason why the story actually kind of morphed fairly specifically between kind of Sarah and I, because well, one of the things is you might notice if you've read or done a lot of D&D games, five is a very magical number. It's the game that it's the number almost all of our games are designed around. We always say a group of 4 to 5 characters of X level. So those five characters that you have end up in Horror in the Windy City, which is the RPG. So what you do is from the Horror in the Windy City, well, once you finish reading The Devil's City, you can actually play the campaign. And the campaign within Horror in the Windy City, it's going to be about, there's two factions of it, or two sections of it. In one section, you actually wake up in the basement as one of these five victims, and you have to get out. And in some ways, I was joking with somebody. He's like, you know what? You think your backstory is impressive? I wrote a novella. My backstory is pretty impressive. Um, but each one of you, and that's kind of really the point of it. Is, again, the ebook is like $3. It's actually included. Almost an ebook version is included in basically every tier, and your players can read their story. And they can read their story as written by, me and Sarah. And again, Sarah's got some serious writing chops. And it's a really, really neat way. You're in that character. I mean, you really are in that character because you've been through a lot of stuff with them already. And so it's not that typical pre-gen where you get handed a sheet, it's a bunch of numbers and maybe a little cameo. It's much more than that. And so that's your big campaign in Horror in the Windy City. So again, that's after half the book's probably going to be a lot of background stuff for historical fiction stuff, which honestly it could be used for World of Darkness. Actually chronicles of darkness really well if you want to play a game like that that's in Chicago in that time frame. It could even be used for Cthulhu or Trail or any of those as well. So if you're playing a game that's in a world, I keep saying the world adjacent to our own, and you need information on Chicago and you want it to be a little bit creepy, the first half of this book has you covered. That's really what we are focusing on. We have timelines, we have locations, we have PCs and NPCs, pre-gens, all that stuff. Are in some cases real people. We didn't change the name. In some cases we had to change them a little bit because they're still around, not the people, of course. But again, that's kind of how it is. And so one group is trying to get out the basement, and that's probably going to take you, I don't know, a couple sessions. I tend to write things to be a mini arc, so like 6 sessions or so will probably get you out. At the same time, though, what we will do too is I want the players to create their own characters, again, based on the novel characters, but from the outside. So maybe you are Rosine's aunt, or maybe you are Paul's little brother, or maybe you're somebody else. And now you actually need to come into the castle and save them. So you kind of have two different versions. You'll have that one central location, but two very different experiences. The one of being a victim trying to escape, and the other one of being the hero and trying to save them. So I'm really excited about that. That's kind of the campaign part of it. And then we'll have a bunch of one shots and just stuff like that you normally see. So it's kind of loosely connected. So you can just kind of drop things in case you don't want to commit 3 months to running a quick campaign.
Fair enough. So, if you're a DM, listening to this, and you're wondering if this is for your players, you're probably looking for players who like Saw, Cube, that kind of stuff, more so than like I'm trying to think of a good horror movie. Cabin in the Woods? No. Cabin Fever? No. That's all the horror movies I
So
know.
so gore is interesting because especially when you said like Saw, gore can be as little or as much as the DM wants. I don't, so I usually say I don't write much gore, but however, this is actually the only time I've ever written gore was actually in the novella. It's not going to be really explicitly stated in the RPG, but the novella has some pretty gory parts, especially at the end. But a horror RPG, you can very easily, very, very easily take out the word horror and put thriller, or take out the word thriller and put suspense, or put the word investigation. As the DM, you have complete control over that. It's actually not super hard to downplay certain horror elements. And literally, if there's something described in there that you think might be too much for your audience, you take the word out, but the story is the same. The mystery is the same. So all of that stuff is there. At its core, it's really investigative. Is probably more than anything. That said, you know what? If you do play a game like this, or Landslide, or any horror game, honestly, just you got to remember your X card. There's a lot of different tools that are very easy that you can use. I've talked about it before in other shows. Probably X card's the easiest, and then also the other one is to make sure everybody that's sitting at the table understands exactly what game they're playing, what the expectation is for what you will be going through, and that everybody's on the same page. The last thing I would ever want to do is have somebody be upset because they played a game of mine, especially, or really any game, and got in a situation that they had no clue was coming. You know, some people like a lot of different things, in their games, and some people don't. And again, I understand that's not necessarily for everyone, the horror part. But again, the DM, GM, it's really your opportunity to make sure you're all on the same page. And again, if you do that, it's relatively easy. It's certainly not. I'm trying to think of what would be a better one. Definitely not Saw, because it's not super gory. You can't do that with an RPG. I mean, it's basically traps and then you die. Um,
I
there's
mean,
more investigation on this one, I guess. More, gosh, what would I? It's like right on the tip of my tongue too. What I'm thinking of. Um, hmm, it'll pop up later, probably tomorrow or tonight when I'm trying to sleep. I'll remember.
probably, yeah. But yeah, like safety tools are great, but we can't overemphasize session zero, sit down, talk with your players, be
Yes.
like, hey, this is a horror campaign. What particular things do you have? Like I've got a thing about drowning. Um, I would not particularly be happy if, I was suddenly subjected to severe descriptions of drowning. I have, in
Right.
fact, sat out on one shots because somebody was like, hey, it's going to be drowning. I'm like, no, goodbye.
Yep. But yeah, no, everybody's got to know what's going on. It's not, we don't need to surprise each other, not with stuff like that. That's just, yeah, that's definitely a line that shouldn't be crossed.
Yeah, be a responsible DM.
Yep, exactly. We're all trying to have fun.
Yeah, and sometimes things take you by surprise. Sometimes it'll be things you didn't expect to be an issue, and I don't have good advice there, but Welcome to the Party is working on a newsletter about that. Go check them out. Anyway, yes. Not shilling other people in the middle of this thing. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to bring up about these wonderful products?
Yeah, so I kind of talk about some of the people that helped actually. So, I've already talked about Sarah. Sarah and I wrote the book. The RPG book, which is Horror in the Windy City. I for me, it was very, very important for this book to stand up to anyone. You know, in the D&D world, I would want my books, these lamps, light, anything else to stand up and compare very well from a quality perspective, quality of art, quality of writing, quality of design to WotC or to Cobalt Press or to Peterson Games, like which again I write for Cobalt and I write for Sandy all the time. But for really anybody, Nord is great. There's a Kawood. There's just a bunch of different publishers right now that are doing really good work. Um, and honestly, I just don't think they get enough attention. But to my point is, I want my books to look as good as any books. And I even look at books like Pelgrane Press probably has some of my favorite books to read. Like they do Trail of Cthulhu, Esoterror, Fear itself. They have Gumshoe as their system. It's just very different. Um, but their books are absolutely gorgeous and they are incredibly well researched and well written. Chaosium always does a great job. Again, Onyx does a good job. There's so many of them. And so I don't want my book to look like, that guy did a Kickstarter off the side of his desk, wrote it, in his pajamas, sitting at the kitchen table. That's really important to me to look as professional as this. So what I did is in addition to myself, I pulled in some great writers. I have Kat Evans, who worked on Altered Carbon just now. That's the newest one that's come out. She's a DM skill person a lot. Celeste Konowich is a guild adept. She's worked on a lot of great stuff. Grant Ellis is someone who is also working with me. Grant is everywhere. Grant has worked for Monty. He's done a lot of DM's Guild. Everybody knows Grant Ellis offline because he's such a nice guy and he does so many great, great things. And two other people I did, and this kind of works towards when I get to the art, is I look for professional writers. So I actually have a screenwriter, who lives in Hollywood. He writes for Blind Spot, which is on NBC. Matt Young, fantastic guy, great writer. I am fortunate to have him. I also have Chris Tallman, who is also a screenwriter and an actor. I mean, Chris is on Nickelodeon every week, and is a fantastic writer. So for me, it was important to really showcase the talents of the writers and to have top tier writers. And then again, to that point, I made sure with the artists too, which if anybody gets a chance, please look at the Kickstarter, or better yet, or just as well, look at the video in the Kickstarter. It's about 2 minutes long. Very, very well done. Yes, had some great people work on that, Grant and Jess. but the art is also super important to me. I have artists, again, I mentioned Francois already, he worked with Stephen King. Danielle Sarah is another one I have, and Danielle's worked with everybody. I mean, yeah, like Peter Straub, Stephen King again, everybody. Thomas Boatwright, who did the like kind of the Lovecraft comics that were out, the little kid ones that are so cool. Um, Sam Araya, again, it's just all these people, the art and stuff, and it's going to be art that you don't see in a D&D book too. I think that's probably something too, is we have a challenge, or I have a challenge, is I want to make sure folks understand that my books use Dungeons and Dragons rules, but it's really not Dungeons and Dragons. It's the rules, it's the mechanics. There's no dungeons, there's no well, I guess there's kind of dungeons, I guess, but there's definitely there's no dragons out there, not yet. So again, I kind of want people to understand. I want my books and these books to look different and showcase art and bring you people that you haven't used. These artists are probably ones that have never. I'm thinking of the 10 or so I used, and other than one that I've already used once, I don't think any of them actually ever done RPG work before. And they were all super excited. Sarah was excited to have some hand in it a little bit, and Matt and Chris too as well. So it's really nice to get new voices in there and just new perspectives. So I was super happy with our team. The team again is I just can't speak highly enough for them.
Yeah, the art is amazing. If I saw horror in the Windy City on a shelf, I would probably pick that up immediately and at least give it a look.
So yeah, that cover was done by Keelan Patrick Burke, and Keelan's won awards for his covers. He's also, I believe, he's actually won a couple awards for his writing. He's also an incredibly talented writer. Great, great, great. Yeah, it's fun. It's really kind of fun, and it's really interesting to work with some of the people that are in different industries, or different kind of, not industry, we're all in the same industry, but in different mediums of this industry, because it's such a different process that we all do, and that everybody's used to. I mean, like the art for the Devil's City, the cover itself is about half digital, half not. The original is actually sitting on my wall. I bought it because I liked it so much, and then Thomas finished it up like there. So yeah, super great art. Incredibly happy with everything those folks did.
Yeah, no doubt. It's incredible. I don't know what else to say. Go look at the Kickstarter. The link is below. Um, you mentioned there's no dungeons, there's no dragons, so I gotta ask, how how easy would it be to like, if I got my players started on tabletop RPGs for the first time with Whispers in the Dark, and then they went, "Hey, I've seen Lord of the Rings recently. I would like to go stab elves with a sword, stab orcs with a sword. You can stab either, I guess." How how easy would it be to kind of port things from this back into that?
So yeah, so that's actually that's not a challenge. It's just something that I know, or something that I'm working around, is that especially with Whispers, since we are a new product, I mean, MT has already done a supplement for it. I've already done a Kickstarter. I mean, it's been out since January 3rd, 3 months, and we have already got things coming. What we don't have is an SRD. And you can use the SRD from D&D, but it's different because we do not have classes. You don't have class abilities. You also are a D6. Everybody is a 6, not an 8, not a 10, not a 12. You're a 6. The relative power level is much, much less because you're in Chicago. Are you going to be walking around Chicago with a greatsword? Where are you going to find a greatsword? You can't walk around with a crossbow. People will look at you really funny. A suit of armor, yeah, you can't do that. You're in, again, like if you're in Baltimore, are you going to be walking around Baltimore in a suit of armor, or are you going to go up to Toronto and walk around the streets and play on the cobblestones and enjoy yourself? And all of a sudden, yeah, why is that guy in armor? It is actually our world. And again, in the 1800s, they didn't have LARP, so they would be even more confused than we would these days. So that is a challenge. That is a challenge. So if you go into it, it kind of goes back to our comment about, I know our context before is about consent and understanding. Part of that is to understand what kind of game this is. So let's say there is zero horror, and I will probably put at least one scenario in here that has no supernatural in it and no gore. It's just a straight thriller or mystery. But if you go around in there, and we actually cover this in Whispers, if you go shoot somebody, you're going to go to jail. And if you go to jail, You may not be able in that game, you actually miss your chance to stop the Crowman. And that's okay. We need to, in a RPG setting, I think we really need to embrace the idea that winning a game is playing. Just sitting down is a pretty damn big win for a lot of us these days, and getting to actually play a game, enjoying it for 2 or 3 or 4 hours is an even bigger one. The quote unquote mission or the big bad, that's secondary. That really isn't what it is. It's hanging out and spending time with our friends and enjoying ourselves, working our brain, doing that kind of stuff. So I hate to say the idea of embracing the thought that you might lose, because you're not losing, but you may not succeed at every mission point or whatever we want to call it that you want. And in the context of a campaign, I think that's super important, actually. If we read a story or I mean, even let's think of like Lord of the Rings, or let's think of Dune or whatever. The book didn't start off with Frodo winning. It didn't start off with Atreides' house winning. It took thousands of pages to get there. And so the fact that you think that you're not, again, that's, we don't play D&D that way, but I think we should play Whispers that way, or we should at least consider it, and even consider playing D&D that way too, is that it makes it so much more interesting. And honestly, it doesn't matter, it's the old, I used to do jujitsu, and it's the old thing. It's like, it doesn't matter how many times you fall down. It matters how many times you get up. And if you get up that 10th time, then you won. As long as you're the last one up, that's really all that matters, if we're even worried about winning. And so again, that's what I really think people should understand is that's really not it. It's really about just finishing it and kind of surviving it in some cases. So again, there's a lot going on there. I know I kind of went on my tangents, but I didn't even answer your question actually, now that I think about it. But again, gameplay mechanics wise, it's pretty similar. If you know how to play D&D, I can hand you the pre-gen and you're ready to go as a player. As a DM, there's a cheat sheet for the sanity rules. You're ready to go too. If all you know how to do is play Whispers and then you try to play D&D, you'll be very, very cautious, and you'll probably survive forever and never get killed, because you'll be like, no, I'm not going in there. That's stupid. Or send somebody else in. I'm going to sit on the back with my bow and arrow and wait and watch. But there is some combat. It's never the focus. But of course, there's going to be action. There are things to do. Rolling dice is the fun part, right? I think a lot of folks think that is it. The only time you roll dice is for combat. So, well, not really. You can do skill checks, and you can do role playing, and there's a lot of other ways to have fun in an RPG game. And hopefully, Whispers kind of scratches that itch for you.
Hopefully, yeah. I
I
mean,
hope so.
it
I really would like to find.
yeah, it definitely seems like a good addition to the, I guess, family of things vaguely orbiting D&D 5e.
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot of
Absolutely.
them. I've played most of them.
There is a lot of them, actually. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think D&D 5e makes up like half of these interviews in some form or
Oh,
another.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, so I mean, again, kind of like I said, at the end of the day, I mean, I wanted to do a game that was investigation, it was horror, that anybody can play. The level of entry on this, if you know D&D, is basically zero, and even if you don't know D&D, it's actually less than D&D a little bit, because we don't have classes, and you can totally get rid of spells. Those two things are like half of your session is dealing with class abilities and picking your spells and doing all that stuff. So it's a faster game, and less interruptions with looking up stuff and all that. And we saw that when the Crystal Palace was played by the Critical Role staff. Chaosium ran out of everything, and I don't know that everybody in the U.S. understands how big a deal that really is, because we all think of D&D as the game. Cthulhu is the biggest game in like Japan that there is. It's not a distant two anywhere else. And it's two now. I think in the U.S. I think it's taken Pathfinder over. Um, Chaosium is it's a real company. It's not like a third party like me, which is one person, sitting at my desk in my house. Chaosium again is an enormous company, and there were so many folks that enjoyed that type of gameplay that they bought starter boxes. I mean, Chaosium was out of everything for like a month. I mean, that video hit 1 million views in like 3 weeks or something crazy like that. So there's a huge appetite for it as always, the challenge is going to be getting people's eyes on it, and then also getting people to, I mean, let's be honest, trust me and trust that I'm going to give them something. I have a few books on Drive Through RPG. I've created a few Kickstarters. I've helped with several. Um, but my books, I have, I'm trying to think of what I do have. I have one that's Tales of the Margrave I wrote for Kobold Press, which did really well and is already out. I've worked on Deep Magic a lot, and it's coming out soon. I worked on one that's not published yet. That's the other thing. It takes so long. I've written three. I've been involved in all three of Sandy Peterson's second, third, fourth books for 5e, and I am involved in his fifth and sixth also. But they see Sandy, not me. They don't see Matt, and that's okay. Sandy's amazing. I love Sandy and Wolfgang. But again, that's my challenge, is making sure that folks understand that and see it. And that's why I come on these things. That's why I'm all over the place. That's why I talk to people. That's why I love doing these things. Actually, it's a lot of fun.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I totally enjoy it. This is my second interview today, actually.
Oh, I don't have a clear response to that. I'm glad.
Yeah, I enjoy talking about this stuff a lot. It's fun to me. It's fun to talk to other people who like it as well.
Yeah, and yeah, like you mentioned, getting people to trust you. I think most people who have backed more than like 3 Kickstarters have probably been burned by something. I have.
Oh gosh,
Um, it's not fun, and things are rough for a lot of people right now with
absolutely.
the global pandemic and everything.
Yep.
Remain indoors, play D&D on a virtual tabletop thing.
There you go. Yeah. So, I mean, I've had a couple people ask me why I did it or why I'm still doing it. I mean, I started work on this Kickstarter in January, or not January, in December. The novella is finished. It's actually being reviewed right now by horror writers or horror reviewers. The book itself, I've been paying for the art. I mean, you see the art, so I've gotten it done. I've been buying art, paying my writers again for months. We're actually pretty close to being finished. If you look at the delivery, it's actually supposed to be delivered in October. It's April. I mean, that's not far away at all for a Kickstarter. Um, I wanted to make sure I was ready to go. And so there's a lot of background into this, a lot of my time, a lot of my funds as well. But the other thing is my artists. I've had artists, actually, my artists um, ask me for work, and I want to give them work. And one of the ways I can give them work is keep my Kickstarter going. Supporting this Kickstarter, yes, it absolutely supports Matt Corley. It also supports the dozen artists and the 5 other writers, and my layout guy and my editor and all that stuff. It supports a lot of people. Um, and that was a big deal because with my writers, I pay professional rates. I don't pay the nickel. I pay what's professional written, like for like Sci-Fi Writers of Association, Horror Writers Association. We have a minimum pay rate, and I pay that. And I also give profit sharing. So if my Kickstarter funds, they actually get a bonus over what they've already been paid. And the more it funds, the bigger their bonus is. I pay everyone else first, because again, I want this to be ready to go, and that's really important to me. It's also really important to me to get great talent and treat them well and make them happy and keep them working and working happy for me, and that's a big deal to me. So
Yeah, for sure. Uh, so I noticed that some of the delivery dates you mentioned, they say October 2021. Is that?
I know it's a typo. I'm sorry. Yes,
it's
because
all it's all
I
good.
have been I this thing has been approved by Kickstarter for a month. And like, so folks that don't know that, Kickstarter actually has to approve your page before you can do it. That can take anywhere from 3 hours to 2 weeks.
Yeah, and you
And
can't
you
change
don't
stretch goals.
know. And you don't know. So if you wait till the last minute, which I did on my first one, I was stress ball. So as many times as I read it, this thing has been proofed like 6 times. I still missed a one on the end of some Octobers. There is everything will be delivered in 2020. If it's just the novella, it will be delivered very, very soon. If it's just the ebooks and stuff too, again, that's all already written. As soon as your check clears, I'm sending you an email. I promise. And I think again, this is something. I did another Kickstarter on Indiegogo, crowdfunder for my daughter for Harper's Tale, and which again is a whole nother conversation. But my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia last year, and we wrote a book. Her and I did with a bunch of artists and a bunch of writers, a D&D AP. It's coming out. Actually, it's almost done. Um, to raise funds for Friends of Kids with Cancer, and so This is my third one, and here's my point. Lampslight happened. I got 3 contracts, and she got sick, and I still finished it on time. I was 2 weeks late on a pretty aggressive number. And if anybody's actually done Kickstarter, they're like 2 weeks late isn't actually late. I'm waiting on stuff that was supposed to be delivered years ago. And as you said, all of us have been burned. Harper's Tale, with her being sick and all this craziness, it's going to be out it's going to be at the beginning of May when it's supposed to be at the end of May. So I don't do late. I'm a pharmacist. I'm an exec in real world. It drives me absolutely insane. I turn down work if I don't have time. So anyway, there's a tangent. These dates are real. I promise. I hope to beat them actually.
Well, I hope you can beat the 2021 ones for sure.
Yes, I promise I will. I promise I will.
It happens. Yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
if you're interested in horror games, there's a link below. That one I won't forget.
Sounds good.
All right, well, thanks for coming on. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Yeah, and for those of you watching at home, have a good night.
All right.